Welcome to NovaraLive. Coming up tonight, Zack Polanski has apologised for his retweet about the Metropolitan Police. King Charles seems to have landed himself in the bad books of two very prominent New Yorkers. For May Day, we take a look at the history of the weekend and the workers' movement behind it. Also, Francis Fukuyama, the man who talked about the end of history, actually says that it might now be China that has the best economic and political model. And Bernie Sanders continues his campaign raising awareness about the threats of AI. I'm Michael Walker. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Michael Mezzatesta, content creator, politics, economics and climate. You've got almost 300,000 followers on Instagram. If any of our viewers aren't within those 300,000, tell us what you do.
Yeah, I make videos trying to condense information about how the economy works, how global systems are tied together, and try to explain to people, really what is driving the political forces that shape our world and how we can steer towards a system that could be better. So a lot of the approach is about how do we solve climate change and how does the economic system need to evolve to make that happen.
And you're on a kind of informal tour of Europe?
Yes, informal tour. And I've been watching Novara Media from my home in California for a while, so it's a pleasure to be here while I'm in London.
That's what I was digging for. That's what
I appreciate the invite.
I was trying to squeeze out of you. If like Michael Mezzatesta, you're a fan of Novara Media, you should consider supporting our work. You can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Of course, you can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and let us know what you think about whatever we're discussing in the comments. Straight into that first story. With local elections less than a week away, a row has erupted between the Metropolitan Police and the Green Party leader. Met Commissioner Mark Ryle has been accused of political interference just days before councils, mayoralties and the nations, or Scotland and Wales, go to the polls. It began when Polanski reposted a tweet containing both this video of the arrest of the suspect involved in a stabbing attack on two Jewish men in North London on Wednesday, as well as accompanying text that described the Met police officers as, quote, repeatedly and violently kicking a mentally ill man in the head when he was already incapacitated by taser. So sort of a critique of their response. As I said on Wednesday's show, I think if a guy has a knife and has just stabbed two people in the street, I tend to give the police the benefit of the doubt if they're trying to disarm him. But anyway, that's somewhat besides the point, because in response, Mark Ryle wrote to Polanski with the Met Police posting, or the Met Police officer posting, the letter online. Now, in it, Ryle accused Polanski of showing a casual disregard for the dangerous and challenging work that police officers do. He also highlighted what the officers believed at the time, that the man may have been a terrorist and possibly carrying an explosive device. He also said this: I am disappointed because it is this kind of inaccurate and misinformed commentary with its associated casual disregard for the incredibly challenging and dangerous work police officers do to protect the public that is contributing to the rising tensions we are seeing in society and undermines officer confidence to act. London's Jewish communities are scared. They have experienced a series of targeted attacks on the community, and they expect our officers to act and protect them. And that is exactly what our officers did yesterday. Your decision to criticize these officers using your public profile and reach will have a chilling effect. Now, again, as I said, I don't actually agree with the tweet that Zack Polanski retweeted. I do think that there is sort of sometimes quite a strange sort of knee-jerk response to sort of criticize any force used by the police against someone who's just engaged in sort of mass violence and is holding a knife. There was a police officer a couple of years ago in Germany, it was a really horrific video, who intervened in a knife attack, a terrorist knife attack, and got killed, right? So I can see why they're not going to take any risks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is an appropriate response from the Met officer, because those two comments suggesting that the leader of the Green Party's repost has contributed to rising tensions while having a chilling effect on officers' ability to protect Jewish communities, potentially a bit overboard. And this is all in the days, of course, before a landmark set of elections and the so-called purdah period, in which state employees are expected to take extra care over public political statements because of the sensitive time. People are going to the polls in a week. On BBC Breakfast, Ryle defended himself.
I wrote a forthright letter to him yesterday, which has been out on social media. I don't do that lightly. Politics is a matter for politicians, not for me. But when somebody who's eminent steps into operational policing and reinforces criticisms that will undermine the confidence in my officers to act in the protection of citizens, I need to step forward and say, no, that's not acceptable.
I have seen lots of commentary today saying, I don't think Mark Rowley sort of came out particularly strongly when Nigel Farage and Reform have been accusing them of two-tier policing, which presumably also might demoralise police officers. Earlier, we reached out to Zack Polanski, who has now removed the repost, and he has released this statement. Everyone in leadership has a responsibility for lowering the temperature at a time of such tension, and I apologise for sharing a tweet in haste. Police responses to emergency situations such as these do need later reflection in the right forums, but I accept that social media is not the appropriate channel for doing so. I have invited Mark Rowley to meet with me to discuss the police response and the wider issues raised in his letter. I think Mark Rowley has now sort of accepted that invitation. They will be meeting. But of course, this apology, the fact that they might be sort of coming together to discuss differences of opinion, doesn't mean that Polanski's political opponents are refraining from taking advantage of the Met Commissioner's intervention. And this was posted online by the Prime Minister this afternoon.
Now, when I then see Zack Polanski come out and retweet or support a criticism of that, I think it's disgraceful. I've no doubt in my mind that those officers probably thought their own lives were at risk. And if you see the footage, there's a lot of people in the scene as well. Now, that didn't turn out to be the case, thankfully. But this is the thing about policing. And I learnt it firsthand in Northern Ireland when I was working with the police over there. I sat in the control rooms when they were making decisions about operational matters. You have to make a decision in a split moment according to the situation as you understand it to be. And for politicians to wade in, as Zack Polanski did, is disgraceful. He's not fit to lead any political party.
It was a retweet. The idea that this is completely disqualifying for anyone to possibly lead a political party because they retweeted someone asking some questions about a police officer kicking someone in the head. Now, I mean, we've all seen the video, right? It's very unpleasant looking at those police officers kick that man in the head. I think the context means that, I'm giving the police the benefit of the doubt. But the idea that retweeting something means that, you're disqualified from leading a political party seems a little bit desperate to me. Let's go on to a different aspect of this story. Further details have now emerged about the man accused of stabbing two Jewish men in London's Golders Green. On Wednesday, 45-year-old Essa Suleiman has appeared in court, charged with the attempted murder of three men, now remanded in custody. The third charge relates to a separate incident that occurred in South London earlier that day, in which a Muslim man known to Suleiman is alleged to have been stabbed. Police have already reported that Suleiman had at some point been referred to the anti-extremism programme PREVENT and that he has a history of mental illness. Channel 4 News also reported that he had been released from a secure psychiatric hospital just days before the attacks. Now, this is important. The case is now a live criminal investigation, so reporting restrictions are in place. We can, of course, though, discuss the political impact of the attacks in Golders Green. On Thursday, the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood raised the country's terrorism level from substantial to severe for the first time in 4 years. That's the second highest of the 5 terrorism threat levels and indicates that authorities believe a terrorist attack is highly likely. The Home Office has said this. The increase of threat comes following yesterday's stabbing in Golders Green in North London, but it is not solely a result of that attack. The terrorist threat level in the UK has been rising for some time, driven by an increase in broader Islamist and extreme right-wing terrorist threats from individuals and small groups based in the UK. And while the UK national threat level is set independently by the JTAC and reflects the terrorist threat in the UK, it comes against a backdrop of increased state-linked physical threats, which is encouraging acts of violence, including against the Jewish community. Now, the raising of the threat level means that police, security services and the public are put on higher alert, but it also means that the police and politicians may make different operational decisions. And one of those sort of under discussion concerns marches and pro-Palestinian marches in particular. Sunday Times columnist Hadley Freeman has appeared on Channel 4 News where she said this about the marches.
Well, first of all, I'd like there to be an acknowledgement that there has been this terrifying anti-Semitic rhetoric in the streets at these pro-Palestine marches. Things like globalize the Intifada, eradicate Zionism. These are not political statements. This is hate speech. And people can criticize Israel all they want. Jews always say that. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. But to demonize Israel and Zionism as uniquely evil, as the source of all evil in the world, that is when it tips into anti-Semitism. And that is when you see mentally ill people, like what happened in Golders Green, globbing onto that and attacking Jews. Well, I am pro the right to protest, and freedom of speech always works in favor of Jews. But there has been a massive escalation of anti-Semitic rhetoric at those marches. Can we stop those marches? I don't really know. But certainly the police need to be more aggressive at stepping in when they see this anti-Semitic rhetoric, when there is this globalize the Intifada. This is what globalizing the Intifada looks like, attacking Jews on the street and burning synagogues.
On GMB, James Schneider had a different view.
If you're thinking about keeping Jewish people safe, which should be a priority, the focus should be on the policing that is going to do that. Cancelling other people's right to protest isn't going to keep a single person safe. The marches are not a threat to Jewish people. There's not been a single arrest for any violence towards any Jewish people.
Not violence, but language, slogans, pictures of paragliders being pinned to people's jackets. That has been picked up, and that is offensive, is it not? And frightening.
Offensive and frightening. Some people may find it offensive and some people may find that frightening, but that does not mean that those are a risk to Jewish people. And again, let's focus on what should the state's priorities be. You've got a pretty small area of London that has seen repeated attacks over the recent weeks, and yet the response to this is not, how are we going to stop these attacks? Who are the people who might possibly have been referred to prevent that we should be looking at? Instead, we still have a state pursuing terrorist cases against 2,700 peaceful protesters for holding up signs with 7-word placards and trying to shut down...
For supporting Palestine Action, the group that was then prescribed as a terrorist group.
Peaceful protesters holding up placards, no threat to Jewish people, and then trying to cancel the annual Nakba Day protest, while at the same time a Tommy Robinson protest will be fine to carry on, which poses absolutely no threat to Jewish people.
Michael, it's all fairly predictable. I mean, I know you have similar discourse in the United States. This is a horrific attack. Again, we can't speak too much about it because of reporting restrictions. But to me, the idea that there's some sort of direct link between people protesting against a genocide and then someone doing this because of like the odd slogan, the causal links just don't really add up to me.
No, they don't. And I absolutely condemn anti-Semitism and any violence against Jewish people. And I think the Jewish people of London should absolutely feel safe. But I think people are trying to score political points on what looks like a crazy person doing an obscene act of violence. Obviously, that must be condemned. But the protests aren't where the violence happened. So I don't see why political protests would get shut down because this crazy guy did this thing, right? So I think that the attempts to shut down people's right to condemn violent actions by the state of Israel and the war crimes that they're committing in southern Lebanon is an attempt to effectively conflate these two issues, which don't seem to have any correlation to me.
I'm just going to read out this tweet. I don't normally do this, but someone says, I've just cancelled my subscription to Novara because Michael thinks it's okay to kick a black guy in the head. Now, this is what I think kind of delegitimizes part of the discourse, right? Because that guy was not getting kicked in the head because he was black. The guy was getting kicked in the head because allegedly, again, reporting restrictions, he just stabbed 2 people and hadn't let go of his knife. So it's not looking at that video, knowing the context, it didn't strike me as a race thing. It struck me as the guy has a knife thing.
Yeah, I agree with your point about policing, right? If someone's going to go out in the street and stab 2 innocent people, the police need to use force to apprehend that person. And if that requires beating them up a little bit, it sometimes is necessary. I don't like to see videos like that. It's tragic, but you can't just use words in these situations. That's what police are for, is to prevent crime.
Yeah, and obviously there is police brutality, right? It exists.
Of course.
Often force is used when it shouldn't be. But if you're going to say that a guy with a knife who's just allegedly stabbed 2 people, force is not appropriate, I think then people are going to start dismissing you when you're making a reasonable point, which is that there is undue force.
Yeah, of course. And police brutality is a big problem. And I think that's why Zack Polanski probably retweeted that tweet, is like, yes, we all on the left should be criticizing police brutality. It is a real problem, and it's racialized, and Black people bear the brunt of it, especially back in the United States where I'm from. So I agree with this narrative, but I do think that in this situation, it was an unsensitive thing to do. And I think he had a pretty good way of trying to diffuse the situation. But look, it seems like this is just being used as an opportunity to score political points against Zack Polanski. I've been watching what the Green Party is doing from the States and actually admiring the movement that they're building. Big fan of Zack, big fan of Hannah Spencer. I think that what Keir Starmer is doing is grasping at straws, trying to slow down the momentum of the Green Party before some very important elections come up. So I don't blame him for doing whatever he can to find a hole in Zack's armor. But in this case, I think it's a stretch.
Yeah, someone's also saying the point is, was the force justified, reasonable, and proportionate? I mean, have you tried to disarm a guy with a knife before? I assume you don't, I imagine, maybe there's some investigation that needs to happen, right? But I think it's scary to disarm someone with a knife, and I could see why you wouldn't want to be trying to do it with your arms, because then your head is next to where the knife is. I can see why you might want to get back and sort of try and sort of get the guy in a position where he's not going to be able to stab anyone.
There may have been a few too many kicks there, right? And that's worth investigating. The policeman may need some discipline for having gone too far, right? But just using force in this situation has to be justified.
Someone again is saying he was already if you've got a knife, you're not incapacitated. You're not incapacitated until you don't have the knife in your hand anymore. Anyway, Donald Trump was delighted by King Charles's visit to Washington this week, but not all New Yorkers were quite so pleased. In advance of a 9/11 memorial to be attended by King Charles, Mayor Zohran Mamdani said this.
If you have a moment to chat with King Charles today down at the World Trade Center Memorial, how do you view your role as mayor? Do you see it as being sort of a polite, diplomatic moment? You just say hello and welcome, or is there anything else you would say to him? Do you have a specific message you might want to deliver?
I'll be saying that today I'll be attending a wreath laying alongside a number of other elected officials, including Governor Hochul, Governor Sherrill. And the focus of that wreath laying is to honor the more than 3,000 New Yorkers who were killed in the horrific terror attacks of September 11th. And that's what I'm really looking to do at that event.
So you haven't thought about anything you might say if you say hello to him and he stops to chat?
If I was to speak to the king separately from that, I would probably encourage him to return the Koh-i-Noor diamond.
The Koh-i-Noor diamond is one of the largest cut diamonds in the world. It's about the size of a chicken egg. And it's the subject of enormous geopolitical dispute. Historians believe it was first mined in southern India thousands of years ago. But since then, it has been seized by Mughal emperors, Persian shahs, and Afghan warlords. It's currently, though, possessed by the Brits, who demanded it under duress from a young Sikh king in 1849. The famous diamond now sits in the Tower of London as part of the royal family's crown jewels. The stone is set in the crown of the Queen Mother, who wore it at her coronation as Queen Consort in 1937. The governments of India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan all claim legitimate ownership of the diamond. And the Indian government has publicly declared an ambition to get it back. King Charles has offered no comment. It's one of those ones where you read it. Lots of people claim that it's originally theirs. Is it the Afghans, the Iranians, or the Indians? It's probably one of them, right? I think the fact it ended up in Britain, you can see it's disputed what countries in those regions have the right to the diamond. It's probably not the ones that came in and colonized the country and then under duress sort of demanded it from a Sikh king. So we probably should give it back. Someone who has Mamdani's back, and this is interesting because, you might watch that thinking, no, he's just a lefty. Of course he's going to say that. But New York politics seems to be different because surprisingly, Mamdani's former Republican opponent in last year's race to become New York mayor seems to agree. This is Curtis Sliwa.
What should he have said to the king yesterday?
Oh, total agreement with him.
because I was in India. This was about 15 years ago, and I met with historians there. They stole all the artifacts, not just in India, all over the world. They refused to give it back. So they have the king and the queen, you know, the royalty. They're a bunch of deadbeats, slackers, the worst welfare cheats in the world. So the countries ask, you know, could we have our artifacts back? And they say no. Meantime, India, they had 2 million volunteers join the king's army in World War II to defend the crown. 100,000 casualties, many more injured. I think the least that the royal family, the royal stiffs could do is not stiff the Indian people, but they do it, and they don't think twice about it. And they should have met with the Epstein victims. Oh, we don't.
Oh, here, yeah, yeah. It's a tough time for the British royals right now.
Well, you would have never known that the way they were treated. You know, it's our anniversary of our revolution, so we wouldn't be bowing down in front of the Union Jack. That should be celebrated. Nathan Hale, I have only one life to give for my country. They hung him. And now standing ovation. Oh, and then what about all the liberals and progressives? No kings, no kings. Oh, the king, the queen. They're fake, phony, fraudulent fugazes. I hate the king, I hate the queen. They should do away with the royalty. And remember, that's who we broke away from in order to have this great country of us. We spend more time celebrating the king and the queen than we do our 250th anniversary. Shame on us. Shame on us.
Michael, could you explain to me who Curtis Sliwa is? Like, I don't really understand how that was a Republican candidate, because he seems really fucking cool.
Yeah, he's actually kind of amazing. He was the Republican candidate for mayor. He was beat out by Cuomo and Mamdani, who ultimately won. But he's sort of, my dad's family is from New York City, and he's sort of like the Italian uncle that every Italian person in New York has, who just sort of comes in with a huge personality, tells it like it is, is a little bit over the top, and he never really had a real shot at the mayoral candidacy. But what was very interesting about him in the race is that Cuomo tried to get him to step down, and Sliwa was basically like, screw you, man, I'm not stepping down. And him staying in the race helped pave the way for Mamdani's victory.
And what do you think about this King Charles visit? Because everyone's talking about how well it went down, sort of people laughed at his jokes. He got 12 standing ovations in Congress. Curtis Sliwa making, the quite interesting point, which is that, the Americans are supposed to be Republicans, not Republicans in the sort of capital R sense, in the sort of against kings sense. But they all seem to be universally swooning over King Charles. Or is that, are we getting a false impression in the UK and actually his visit's more divisive than we've been led to believe?
I think it's probably more divisive because the audience at the White House is going to lean towards people who probably like him and will just, clap if Trump is clapping. But I do think it's an interesting point Slee was making, that if we're really are anti-monarchy and no kings, then we probably shouldn't be applauding the fact that the UK still has a king. And I think it's one of the most interesting things about British culture, honestly, coming over here and observing just what's going on for a few months and seeing, the tabloids about the royals and things like that. I'm sort of like, why do people still give the king and the royal family so much attention? I get it. It's kind of a fun part of British culture, and it's interesting to folks and it's entertaining, but I think it's a bit outdated if you really are going to stand by the liberal values of democracy, right? So maybe a bit of a harsh thing to say about British culture, but at the same time, I think that the visit probably wasn't applauded by as many people in the US as the TV may have suggested.
I don't think anyone's going to be too offended if you say that we're a little bit outdated for still having a royal family and still sort of looking up to them and pretending that this is sort of a legitimate source of political power. While we got a Yank in the studio, Mamdani, everyone loves him. Donald Trump loves him. New Yorkers love him. He seems to be popular across. Obviously, you love him.
Yeah,
but it's going remarkably well, it seems.
It's going remarkably well, and I really want it to keep going well, because what he's doing is he's bringing a completely new type of politics to the Democrats, which is a party that's been, I think, really glacial in terms of its ability to move forward and evolve and change into a really progressive party that actually represents working people. And he's come in, he's doing so much. It's been a little over 100 days, and he's made so many changes in that city. And every little win he gets, I'm applauding, because it's showing that not only can this type of politics win elections, but it can also govern effectively. And I think that's the criticism that the centrists have against the progressives in the US is that, okay, you have all these cool ideas, you know how to get elected, you know how to be populist and say what people want to hear, but then you get in office and you don't do anything because you don't know how to govern. And Mamdani is an incredible counterexample to that argument, and I really am just cheering for his success.
Will AOC be the Democratic candidate in the next presidential election?
Man, I hope so. I don't know. I think that there's some valid conversations about whether the whole U.S. electorate is ready for AOC as president, but I'm certainly ready. I would vote for her. I think she's amazing, but I think that also we need to look at who are the other progressive candidates that may be able to bring an AOC type agenda into the White House, who may be more electable. But I think she's electable. I think she's fantastic, and I hope that she is
Who would
the
the other candidates be? Are there sort of...
Yeah, there's a few governors. There's Pritzker in Illinois. There's Shapiro. People are talking about Pete Buttigieg, but I think the main candidate that folks are talking about is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, my home state. Is he good? Do you like him? I'm not a huge fan. No,
Okay.
I think he seems to be one of those people who will not move the party forward. He seems like more of the same. He's got a lot of corporate backers. He seems to be beholden to the money that has captured the U.S. political system. That said, he's been pretty good on climate as a governor of California. He's pushed the green agenda pretty effectively. I do think that he has some, there's some redeeming qualities about him, but I don't see him as a progressive.
Do you think the Democrats will win the next presidential election?
Probably, yes. I think so. The Republicans are collapsing right now. I mean, there's the popular support for this imperialist war in Iran is not to be found. I think the Epstein news has continued to hound them because Donald Trump is so implicated in that story. And I think people who are in the MAGA, quote unquote, base, who really believe that Trump was going to represent them and bring the fight to the elites and the deep state are starting to see, like, wait a second, he is just one of them. He's one of those people he was complaining about on the campaign trail.
Do you think because with the Epstein thing, it seems to me such a story where anyone can see what they want to see.
Yeah.
As in, so if you're sort of a Trump-inclined person, you can see, you'll focus on Epstein, Clinton, Epstein, liberal establishment. And then if you're a Democrat, you can look at it and say, Epstein, Trump.
Yeah.
Epstein, sort of like Steve Bannon.
Right.
Anyone can just sort of look at him and associate him with their political enemies.
Well, they're all correct. That's the problem, is that the political class in the United States spans the Republicans and Democrats, right? So yes, the Clintons are implicated, 100%. Yes, the Bushes and the Trumps are too. The ruling class, we call them the Epstein class now, that dominate American politics aren't red or blue, they're both. And so that's why we need a completely fresh set of leaders. And I think there's an argument to be made as to whether those two parties are really the vehicles to move new leadership forward in the states. But if they are, we need a new class of people who aren't part of that establishment. And that's why I do think people like Mamdani and AOC are, a breath of fresh air for U.S. politics.
It's Friday, so the weekend is upon us. Indeed, this weekend will be 3 days long for many watching, as well as for us here at NovaraLive. Today is International Workers' Day, the only annual holiday our organisation shuts up shop for. And we do also take, Christmas off, but that's besides the point. Many of you watching are likely to work a 5-day week, so next week you'll get a taste of one of our perks here at Novara, a 4-day week organisation. We're very proud of that. It's an idea that's gaining traction, not just in the UK, but across the world, with workers fighting for a 4-day week across a range of industries. That worker-led fight for a 3-day weekend is very similar, stands on the shoulders of giants, of one that workers undertook 100 years ago for the 2-day weekend that most of us now take for granted. So how was it won? Well, workers in Britain and across Europe have long had Sunday off as the traditional Christian Sabbath. But from as early as the 17th century, there was a convention for taking Mondays off too. So it was an unofficial day off. It was a time for recovering from a Sunday hangover or continuing on the lash for a second day. Makes you feel proud to be British. By the mid-19th century, it was pretty much an institution with music halls and theatres staging Monday night events for those not working. During the Industrial Revolution, though, with bosses increasingly competing to improve productivity, it began to vanish under employer pressure. They started sort of noticing if people didn't turn up on a Monday morning. At that point, unions began arguing for an official break in the working week. And in 1842, with the Early Closing Association, a campaign by shop workers to get Saturday afternoons off, as well as Sunday, in exchange for coming into work on Mondays, was launched. Temperance societies liked that idea as well. They were keen to cut down on how much the working class drank and improve their respectability. And the clergy supported it, hoping for larger church turnouts on Sunday. Over the next decades, a lively leisure industry soon sprung up around the idea, with train operators offering discount fares for Saturday afternoon day trips. At the same time, around the 1890s, football was taking off, with Saturday afternoons set aside for matches. But even the 1.5-day weekend, while popular and increasingly taken up, wasn't enshrined in law. Unions and workers were constantly fighting for more, as they should have been. In January 1919, thousands of demobbed soldiers returned from World War I and flooded the Glasgow labour market. To regulate pay and competition for jobs, unions proposed a reduction from a 54-hour to a 40-hour working week, so essentially a 5-day week. But resistance from the government and employers led to industrial action, with tens of thousands of people turning out in George Square on the 31st of January. The police reacted badly, charging men, women and children with batons. Many people were injured, but some of the organisers of the movement were later elected members of Parliament for the Labour Party. A few years later, in 1923, Labour formed its first government. But it was only on May the 1st, 1926, so exactly 100 years ago today, that Henry Ford established a 5-day week for his workers in the United States, taking them down from 6 with no loss of pay. And why did he do it? Well, because he believed the extra rest time would spur productivity. An argument we hear again today for the 4-day week. By the 1930s, the 2-day weekend had become the norm in Britain, won by workers organising in the country's docks, mills and factories, with Boots becoming the first major employer to institute it in 1933. The 5-day week may have been hard won, but it's now totally commonplace. So can we do the same for the 4-day week? I'm joined now by Joe Ryle, director of the 4-day week campaign. And welcome to the show. To set us off, let's talk about this anniversary. So your organisation is celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the 5-day week at Ford Motors. Why was that so significant?
I guess there's no one anniversary where you can say that was the moment the weekend was won. But if there was one, the one that everyone sort of points back to all the time is this 1st of May 1926 moment where Ford Motor Company, who were a very big manufacturing company in the United States of America at the time, they announced they were allowing their staff to work 5 days instead of 6 days. And that really, you just saw a ripple effect after that. As soon as that happened, loads of other major employers, manufacturing employers and others kind of followed their lead, really. So it is the most significant moment that people say and point back to say the weekend begun. And that was 100, as you say, it was 100 years ago today, which we are celebrating. But what we're also saying is, 100 years of working 5 days a week is enough. It's productivity, technology has, is insurmountable. The amount that's grown since that time. Unfortunately, working hours are still relatively similar. There's been a slight reduction, but barely changed. And so what our argument is, this is 100 years later. Surely now, if you think about all the technology we've had and even all the technology still coming in, artificial intelligence, all the rest of it, surely we're long overdue a 4-day working week. And I guess the encouraging thing is that over the last few years, hundreds and hundreds of companies in the UK, Novara Media being one of them, have successfully implemented it, have shown that it does work, for both the workers and the employers. And we're hopefully using this anniversary to kind of push on, to try and get the kind of next couple of hundred companies to kind of follow them.
And I suppose both in the history, in the narrative we gave there and in the campaign for the 4-day week, there's these two arguments that get made, which is one, sort of workers demanded it and won it against the sort of the wishes of the bosses. So sort of workers had to fight for this and grasp it. And then the other argument is that the bosses gave it because it was actually in their interest as well. And this is all actually a mutually beneficial thing and everyone wins. And I suppose, which can it be both?
I think it can. I mean, we're working with employers to implement it, and that often focuses on the arguments around productivity, ensuring their bottom lines met, all the rest of it. So we do support employers to implement 4-day working weeks. But let's be honest, we can't rely on all the, every boss in the country to hand down this benefit. We do need some bottom-up organising, and that's what we're also starting to do increasingly. And it's also encouraging the trade unions are really kind of looking at this much more seriously now. And we're seeing a lot more kind of workplace campaigns. And part of the work the 4-day week foundation is doing at the moment is supporting workers to organise in their workplace for a 4-day week. So let's see. We're making progress. We've made lots of progress over the last couple of years, but there's a next step. And it's interesting thinking back to the past in terms of Ford Motor Company. You mentioned Boots. Who's going to be the big company today that's going to do the 4-day week first? We need a Google or an Amazon or someone like that to just really set the path for everyone else. Another thing we're working on at the moment.
And what's your analysis of why we still have a 5-day week? I mean, obviously we at Novara Media don't, but most people still have a 5-day week. John Maynard Keynes, I think maybe it was nearly 100 years ago, I don't know, a bloody while ago, sort of said we would end up with a 15-day week at some point because of increases in productivity. We've had enormous increases in productivity and working hours haven't declined much at all. I suppose in your campaign for a 4-day week, do you need an analysis of why it hasn't happened yet?
I think one reason is, the trade unions have been weakened. I mean, I think we all know that. I think it's only 25% of the workforce is unionised at the moment. So that's one reason. That's the kind of reality we're working with. There's also just, there is a kind of feeling that we're just sort of like stuck in the past and just getting on with it. It's the way things have always been, and we hear that quite a lot. And so that's why, we think it's really important to show that the companies can do it and have done it. And it's been exciting really working with those companies. It's not work I ever expected I would do, but, I've been working with all sorts of companies across virtually every sector of the economy now that have shown they can move to a 4-day working week. Normally 4 days, 32 hours, no loss of pay. Other industries, they might go a bit slower. They might do a shorter working week and reduce a couple of hours and get there. But what we're saying is let's not do another 100 years of the 5-day working week. We don't need to. The technology that we have, it means we don't need to do that. There's a bigger conversation to have around it, but definitely one of the reasons is the trade unions aren't quite as strong as they used to be.
And who's most open to it and who's least open to it? So just off the top of my head, I'm guessing NGOs are kind of fine with it. Office workers, because I suppose over a 40-hour week, office workers can slow down at different points, and it is plausible to me that if you go into work less often, you'll be more productive. I suppose at the end, where I imagine it's going to be hardest is like a hospital or a school or anything public facing. Is that correct? Is that sort of where the challenge is most severe?
I mean, it's broadly supported across the country. If you look at the polling, it's, every different kind of class, race, age, every single demographic seems to support it. But there will be challenges in certain sectors. I mean, where the battle has been in kind of the public and the press has been over the public sector, unfortunately. I mean, there's a local council in South Cambridgeshire that have successfully implemented a 4-day working week. If you look at the evidence, that council services have improved, that workers are happier. It's kind of what's not to like about it. But unfortunately, there has been a battle and others kind of ideologically using that to say this is ridiculous, lazy taxpayers, lazy kind of public sector workers, and these kind of quite interestingly arguments that were made 100 years ago against the 5-day working week. So we're hearing that a lot. We're hearing those kind of arguments made again and again. The economy won't be able to handle it. Productivity will go down, and every time these 4-day week trials happen, it seems to be the opposite. So that is something we're coming up against at the moment.
And maybe people will start having kids again. I'm very pro 4-day week. Joe Ryle, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Cheers, nice to see you.
Francis Fukuyama is a political scientist famous for his essay, The End of History. It was published in 1989, just after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it put forward the argument that contention that with communism sort of in decline, collapsing in much of the Eastern Bloc, liberal democracies and market economies, or the combination of those two, no longer faced any ideological competition. In short, he believed market liberalism was humanity's final form. That argument has, of course, long faced criticism. And Fukuyama, he sort of realized that. He's recognized that for a while. He's had a change of heart. And he said this specifically about China to Sam Harris a couple of weeks ago.
I think that the Chinese have created a pretty impressive system. It is authoritarian. It's quasi-market-based, and they are very successful at marshaling new technology. They're capable of innovating a lot of things we thought they weren't able to do. And conversely, democracy, especially American democracy, looks like it's falling apart. If I were somebody trying to move from a poor, misgoverned country somewhere else, I would have chosen the United States without question for most of the last several decades. But, these days, I'm not sure that it's such an attractive model for many people. And I would say if the Chinese keep their development machine going, it may turn out that they have a real alternative. I think, however, that it's a little premature to come to that conclusion because there are a lot of problems in China which are related to the fact that there's no feedback, there's no responsiveness to public opinion, and that is going to get them into trouble, I think, in the long run.
I think he's actually overstated the case at the end there. I mean, the Chinese government is responsive to public opinion, not in the same way that Western governments are, and obviously they don't have free speech, which is, there's no two ways about that. But they are very attuned to what their populations want and what they're complaining about, especially on the local level. But why that clip, has gone viral, especially sort of from pro-China accounts, is because this is the guy who said, not only is liberal democracy and capitalism the best, but it's now the only system sort of worth paying attention to. It's the final form of human society. There is no competition. And now not only is he saying, history hasn't ended in the sense that there's still conflict, he's saying that the non-liberal sort of quasi-capitalist one might actually be better, right? It's not just that it still exists, it's that maybe they are better than the liberal capitalist democracies. I'm going to talk about this loads. I've just come back from China. And that is one thing you do get walking around. Whatever you think about the system, I'm not really sort of into this politics where it says China brilliant, America terrible. I think both have pros, both have cons, both systems. But walking around China, there is just no doubt whatsoever that this is a system which works, right? In the same way that the American system works, right? It's produced enormous wealth. It has a wide degree of consent. It's not a totalitarian society at all. And it is working, right? So I do think it does really, really, I suppose, encourage humility about people who sort of are very dogmatic about this is the only way a society should be organized, because that society is organized in a very different way. And it's clearly working for, well, hundreds of millions of people. Let's be frank. What's your take on this? Your China take? Everyone needs one.
Well, you said the American system's working. I think it's clear that it's working less and less, right? So I think that history's back on, according to Fukuyama, and it seems like a good time to make that claim because the idea that liberal democracy could just, and capitalism could endlessly sustain itself and, wealth would rise and well-being would go up and poverty would go down, has that narrative has run its course. Poverty isn't declining due to capitalism, at least not anymore. If you were to walk around the States, especially in a city, you would not probably say, this is working. There's a lot of things wrong. There's people sleeping on the street. There's more crime than there is in China. Now, I don't like to take the black and white view either, that China good, America bad. Of course, there's a lot of nuance there, especially as it comes to freedom of speech and authoritarianism. But it is clear that the U.S. system, which is premised on largely an oil and gas powered economy, and the U.S. petrodollar maintaining financial control over the oil and gas trade, seems to require not only poverty, but also dropping bombs and the invasion of countries that go rogue and try to build a multilateral world order like what BRICS is trying to do. And so I think it's very clear that history is back on. And I think the reason that's so obvious is that the limits of American financialized capitalism are starting to appear. And I think one of the biggest ones that's been obvious to me for a while is climate change. I mean, the ability of this system to keep growing and its obvious pushing up against the ecological limits of our planet, to me is an obvious reason why the original thesis of Fukuyama it was incorrect, that history hadn't ended. It just sort of reached stability for a few decades, and now we're starting to see the tipping points that were originally baked into this model.
Yeah, the aggressiveness of the West versus the peacefulness of China is something like I think about a lot, because there's two arguments, which is that there is something about liberal capitalist democracies that makes them sort of particularly expansionist, or it's just that whoever is the dominant power in history tends to be quite violent because it can. And I suppose I think it's too early to say whether sort of like a dominant, if China becomes sort of the main imperial power, will it begin behaving like the West did in the 20th century? I feel like the 20th century, the West was the driver of sort of like wealth and progress, but also the main kind of murderer. And colonizer. And then the issue is in the 21st century, it seems pretty clear that China and East Asia are going to be the main drivers of development. And can they do it without the colonialism and the war?
So far, they seem to be. Yeah, I mean, the West was built on a history of colonialism. It didn't only start at the end. It was the buildup of these Western democracies, and the development of the West was largely built on labor that was appropriated from the global South, and materials appropriated, and it was often very violent. The way that order, quote unquote, was brought to those colonies, right? And so I think it's very notable that China has been able to come to this position of power without that history of colonialism that required so much extraction to build up these beautiful capital cities of Europe, right? And so I think it points towards, I hope, a future that can be more peaceful in a world order that is, if not dominated, then at least heavily influenced by China. Of course, we can't just assume that their intentions will always be good, but the track record is very, very good in terms of the amount of violence required to build them up to this point.
Yeah. Externally, I mean, internally, there was quite a lot of violence over the past 100 years. But externally, I mean, it is, people often say about, like when they're sort of talking about the Chinese military, oh yeah, the Chinese military is not going to be very good because they haven't, you only learn how good you are in war and they haven't been in any wars. And people sort of saying this like it's a negative thing. It's like, that's kind of good. Like, I love this powerful country that doesn't know if its military is any good because it hasn't fought any wars. Like, fantastic. And they're like, oh, the West knows its militaries are great because we're always invading places. It's like, yeah, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, and we always need testing grounds to develop new weapons to feed the military-industrial complex, right? And that's, I think, a big reason why a lot of these conflicts get extended is they become testing grounds and areas of profitability for U.S. arms companies that require shareholder returns, right? And so you sort of start to see the logical contradictions baked into a shareholder capitalism-baked model of empire. And I mean, of course, there are holes to poke in the Chinese model as well. But I do think that if it's not all based on profit and endless wars, then it seems like a better model to me.
I'm quite boosterish on China. You know that. And there was a story in the Financial Times this week, though, that planted some seeds of doubt. So apparently China's spy agency has begun warning Chinese young people against dropping out of the career rat race. So the context here is the trend in China to lie flat. So this is the idea that for young people, the Chinese education and jobs market is just too competitive. And that has meant that some people are just deciding, I don't want to do this anymore, right? They're opting out. They're going to live with their parents. Seems reasonable, rational to me. There was, when I was walking around Chengdu, it felt like Berlin or Madrid, and you could feel like there were quite a lot of people lying flat. In Beijing and Shanghai, less so. Let's go back to that Financial Times article. They say the Ministry of State Security, the country's spy agency, this week said foreign forces were seeking to erode the minds of Chinese youths by disseminating anti-work propaganda online, encouraging them to drop out or, in Chinese internet parlance, lie flat. And they say they want only for our youth to lie flat, handing over our development dividends, strategic opportunities, and the future of our nation. So that is what the Ministry of State Security has been saying in a WeChat promotional video. And also from that WeChat video, the ministry says, may every young person uphold their original aspirations, stand firm on their principles, remain undisturbed by noise and unclouded by confusion, and thrive in the prime of their lives. As I say, I'm still boosterish about China. What they're doing is very impressive. I'm sure their development is going to continue. And, whether or not it accelerates, I don't know. But, I think the 21st century is theirs, essentially. But it's a very competitive society. Young people are expected to work very long hours. I really don't think you need a foreign power to encourage some of them to drop out and chill. I'm glad some of them are dropping out and chilling.
Yeah, sounds like they might need a 4-day work week as well. But I'm glad we went straight to this, because this is a pressure point and maybe a limit or a weakness of the Chinese model, right? If it's so hard for young people to get a job that they're dropping out of the workforce entirely, that's a big problem, and it's difficult to steer an economy in the sort of like public way that the Chinese government is doing, and encourage the levels of dynamism that are required to keep all of the youth employed. I mean, as someone who flirts with the idea of degrowth and this idea of, maybe if we all just stopped focusing so much on this line go up mentality of endless progress, that maybe we'd have better lives. Parts of the lie flat movement to me are somewhat aspirational, like, hey, maybe slow down a little bit. But at the same time, if it really is a response to effectively a dead end for young people economically, then that's a real problem, because you need to allow, like, your young generations need to have a future. And so I think it's a real issue that China's running up against, and I worry for the youth of China that their growth and dynamism is starting to peter out. I think I'm wondering if it's because of the inevitable limits of growth-based economies. But I also think that I hope that this can be solved in the near term, because lying flat probably isn't the solution.
I think it's also just maybe the privilege of becoming rich, right? So obviously, if you're a developing country and you're poor, basically you don't get to lie flat, because even you say, oh, I'll just go live at my parents' house in Chengdu. Yeah. This to me seems like China becoming a richer country and having the normal thing that any richer country has,
they have
which is
moody rich kids now.
Young people, but middle class. Some young people can afford not to work anymore, and so don't work anymore, and that's where like art comes from, and where like pop culture and new music, and I think it's great. I think every society needs a lot of people to lie flat, and I think the lie flat thing is probably a positive development for China. I mean, also they work very hard because they're a developing country. Like, developing countries, you have to work very hard to develop. But if they're going to mature into which they are, maturing into a developed economy, I think they should be celebrating the people lying flat instead of pretending that this is sort of like a conspiracy by foreign powers.
And at what point do you manage the economy in such a way where you start to give the benefits of growth to the working class in the form of higher wages or more leisure time, right? Yeah. And that's the whole point of the 4-day work week. And that's what happened when the neoliberal agenda got woven into corporate capitalism in America, is that productivity continued to go up, but none of the benefits of that productivity actually went to workers. And so that was when, basically a lot of the economic problems that we're facing today in the West began, in my opinion. But if those productivity gains aren't translated into higher wages for workers, then they should translate into more time, more free time, right? At the very least, I think they should translate into wages, but I think that ultimately some benefits need to go to workers at some point. And if there's a culture of growth at all costs, always push yourself, no matter what, develop, at what point does your economy reach a level where you're like, okay, we've developed enough to sustain well-being for everyone in this country, let's actually start to take our foot off the gas and focus on well-being and environmental protection and some of those other things that are not just GDP, right? And so I think this is a moment for China to say, what would prioritizing other economic objectives look like?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it goes into bridges. So people don't get to consume as much as their sort of level of development would suggest. They have a very weak welfare state, very weak pensions, but lots of that money gets saved and then gets invested in infrastructure. And my sense is that sort of China's priority is still sort of to assert its industrial dominance, potentially in case there's some war with the Americans. Fair play. Bernie Sanders, the 84-year-old senator, is leading the charge to protect the world from the existential threat of artificial intelligence. He is proving quite relentless at bringing attention to this issue. And he recently brought together leading scientists from China and the United States to discuss the perilous situation we face.
You have a real concern that if we do not control this technology, it could escape us with calamitous impacts. Is that correct? Yeah, that is what I said. Does the rapid and uncontrolled development of AI pose a substantial threat to the human race? Are people like Nobel Prize winner Dr. Jeffrey Hinton exaggerating when they say there is a 10 to 20% chance that AI wipes out humanity?
No, they're not exaggerating it. In my professional opinion, based on a paper that we published in the top AI conference, NeurIPS, recently, they were actually sugarcoating it. I think it's likely to be a lot higher than 20% risk that we basically end civilization as we know it if you steam ahead with completely unregulated AI. Why do I say that? Well, because what the companies are very openly admitting that they're trying to build here is not just some slightly smarter chatbot, some ordinary technology. They're saying they want to build super intelligence, which by definition is AI that's so smart that it can outperform by huge margins humans at every job. And they can also, with incredible skill, control robots and other machines. And if you want to know what happens if you unleash millions or billions or trillions of vastly smarter than human intelligent agents on the planet, just go down to the Washington Zoo and ask yourself, who's in the cages? Is it the smartest species around or not?
What you're telling us, bottom line here, is that we have a lot to worry about.
Yes.
To say the least. All right, let's go to Dr. Zhang in Beijing. Dr. Zhang, what do you think?
Well, I should agree. So until now, we do not have scientific evidence and practical way to keep superintelligence safe enough not to bring catastrophic risk for human. And the world has not been ready to welcome superintelligence, not as a tool that is controllable at this point.
All right, let me just, bottom line, Dr. Zhang, I'm hearing you say that you have a real concern that if we do not control this technology, it could escape us with calamitous impacts. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is what I said. Without scientific evidence of how to secure ourselves, it's really dangerous to do this for the way that we're doing for the current AI.
Now, I think what Bernie is doing, I mean, I'm going to say this, but I think what he's doing here is so impressive for two reasons, which is one, the people I say this all the time, the people who created this technology say that it has a very strong chance of killing us all, right? So these are the people who are really in the know, Jeffrey Hinton and the like. But it is still a topic which sounds way too wacky for most politicians to speak about, because I think they're all scared that if they come out and talk about it, they're going to get mocked as someone who's, believing in sci-fi narratives. Also, all of these politicians are facing now a huge lobby, especially in America, to stop them regulating AI. So there's loads of pressure to say, okay, these scientists are saying this is a big problem, but it's better to just shut up. And he's coming out, putting his, neck on the line and saying, I know this might sound wacky, but the people who are really in the know are saying we have to take this seriously, and I'm going to use my whole platform to put loads of sort of attention on this issue. The other reason this is really important is because a big argument you often hear when you talk about AI risk, especially from sort of Americans, is they say, oh, we'd love to pause, but the reason we can't pause is because if we do, then the Chinese will accelerate. And if the Chinese overtake us, well, that would be terrible because the Chinese are evil and irresponsible, and it needs to be a liberal democracy that has it, because of course we can really trust the Americans, because it's not like they just go and bomb random countries, right? You can trust the Americans. We break every deal we make within a week. Whereas China, actually, whatever you think of their political system, they're a fairly stable country that do stick to their agreements. So, I'm meandering, but the argument they make is we can't pause because then the Chinese will accelerate. What Bernie Sanders is doing is getting together Chinese scientists and American scientists and saying, I think we can work this out, right? And it is the case, actually, that the Chinese have publicly seemed much more open to a pause than the Americans. It was the Chinese who first brought up the idea of a pause at the UN. So this argument, which is often put forward both by American politicians and American business people like Dario Amodei, from Anthropic, where they say, oh, we'd love a pause, but we can't because then the Chinese would do it. I think Bernie is getting this exactly right. He's also been speaking to the media about AI. Here he is with Caitlin Collins from CNN.
He says there's a 10 to 20% chance that if AI becomes smarter than human beings, which is likely, that it could result literally in the extermination of humanity.
But only 10 to 20%.
Oh, hey, what's the problem? Right.
Only 10 to 20%. It's amazing, right? Because she said, well, he's put forward the idea that there's a 10 to 20% chance that this could literally kill every single person on the planet. And she's saying, well, only 10 to 20%. Like, still, we've got 80% chance of surviving. Like, maybe ChatGPT isn't worth it to take that risk. That is Russian roulette. I don't know what your take is on this. Everyone's got very different AI takes. Lots of people think this whole existential threat stuff is nonsense. Where do you stand?
Well, it sounds like they won't kill all of us. They'll probably keep some of us in a zoo, right? Like they were saying in the clip. So
if they're smart, if they know what's good for them.
Yeah. Well, look, I am not AI scientist who can give you a different percentage. I take the experts at their word that 10 or 20% is the ballpark. And that feels like way too high of a number for us to just leave AI completely up to the whims of basically the tech elite in the United States, who seem to have zero interest in the welfare of our species. They are more interested in colonizing Mars and neurolinking themselves and becoming cyborgs than in like establishing any sense of human rights or well-being or democracy on this planet. And so I think that those odds will only go up if we leave AI in the hands of people like Sam Altman and Peter Thiel. And that terrifies me. That's something that keeps me awake at night. And so I think the third thing that's so impressive about what Bernie Sanders is doing, that he's 84 years old. So God bless him. Like I'm so grateful for this man's career in US politics. But ultimately, what he's saying is, I think, obvious to anyone who has an interest in the future of our species, which is let's move control of AI out of the hands of a few psychopaths into a model that actually asks the question, what would a pro-social use of AI be? Like what? Because this is a very powerful tool. And technology isn't necessarily bad. People are saying Bernie's a decelerationist and he doesn't like want progress. No, like AI in the hands of a society that's using it for well-being could be amazing. Can we dream up that future and make that possible? And I think the only way to do that is to stop giving all of the control to a handful of people who don't really care about humanity.
It's funny, like you mentioned Peter Thiel, because the same people who say we've got to do it first because otherwise the Chinese do, sort of in the next sentence say, maybe humans will be replaced by machines and maybe that's okay because they're smarter than us anyway. And that's just sort of Darwinian natural selection. Great. It's like, no, take the nuclear weapons out of their hands. Let's wrap up there. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
How do people follow you on Instagram?
Oh, just Michael Mez. That's my my username. You can find me easily on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all the places.
Michael Mez on all of those platforms.
Yeah.
Lots of people saying we need to have your name up the whole way through, but I didn't. Well, that's how you follow Michael Mezzatesta. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for watching. We won't be back on Monday. We'll be back on Tuesday. So have a great long weekend if you are lucky enough to enjoy one. If you're in one of those industries where you do have to work on Bank Holiday Monday, thank you so much for all that you do. I suppose unless you're sort of a weapons manufacturer, I don't know. But most of you, thank you for all that you do. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.